Hi, I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead, and welcome to episode 199, Civil and Collegial Scholarship. This episode is part of a whole series of podcast episodes this week as part of the 2024 Big Rhetorical Podcast Carnival. A lot of podcasts that are dedicated to putting out episodes about rhetoric, writing studies, communication is pretty broad. So we're putting everything together as part of the podcast carnival. And we're all doing episodes on the theme of politics/rhetorics, navigating crisis, culture, and civility. So I've always wanted to do an episode on collegiality and scholarship. And so I wanted to talk today about a couple of examples of collegial scholarship that I think are models for how we might talk to each other when we review each other's work, when we are participants in each other's scholarship, and so forth. So the first one that I want to talk about is an example of a project I did a long time ago where I misrepresented a participant in something that I was doing. And this was a little bit of a rookie mistake on my part where I talked to another participant who was misrepresenting the participant that kind of had their views presented in a way that was definitely not fair to them. And so one of the things I'm impressed about the situation is at the time, I didn't really realize that that was a mistake that had been made in scholarship, but it was brought to my attention by the person who it affected. And I was really impressed at how they handled it. They sent me an email and said, "Hey, can we discuss this? I just heard about this thing. I just came across what you wrote. That's not really what happened. I'd really like to have a conversation about it." And so what we did is we ended up having a live discussion. At this point, I do not remember if it was on the phone or on Zoom. It wasn't face to face, but it was online or live. Let's just say that because it was a while back. But I was really impressed at how this colleague just said, "Hey, that's not really what happened. I'm concerned about this because now I'm misrepresented out in the world. And, now seeing it, I totally understand their position. I should have done better scholarship. I should have not maybe even used that piece if I wasn't totally sure about it." And it's a very tiny piece of a large project, but that to me does not make it any better. If I could redo that part of the project, I definitely would redo it. And so, together, this colleague and I kind of discussed ways to fix it. And so, one of the things I talked about was, potentially having another, maybe putting in a redaction, having something out there to represent that. But what we ended up settling on was that, I use this now as a teaching lesson for grad students all the time. I will say, "Hey, look in this project. This is a mistake. Here's what happened because of it. Here's how I'm addressing it further." I definitely talk to graduate students about it all the time now. And this was a long time ago. And maybe someday I'll do a podcast interview with that colleague. So that colleague knows who they are. They're very gracious and wonderful about it. They really didn't have to be. They definitely could have bashed the project and all that, but the project, I would argue, and I think they kind of respected the goals of what this other project was out in the world, and they were okay with it because this was kind of, like I said, very small. It was like a sentence, but a sentence can make all the difference. And so the fact that I know that now, I'm able to share that out with the public. I'm able to talk about it in workshops. And like I said, I'm hoping maybe I can do an episode or something like that someday about that a little bit in more detail. But for right now, this is a good example of some really good civil discourse in my little corner of the scholarly world. How do we talk to each other about scholarship we don't agree with? I mean, sometimes it might be that your work is misrepresented. So, for example, many of us have gone to Google Scholar and looked at who cited us and all that kind of stuff. Well, you might come to find that somebody represented your work in a negative light. I've been fortunate that that has not happened because not a lot of people are doing what I do in the area of faculty writing studies and productivity, but I'm sure it will happen. I'm sure that somebody will say, "Nope, she's totally wrong about all the things that she says." And that's something that you might find. And, it's okay to have these scholarly disagreements, especially if they're respectful and civil. And that's part of us making scholarship. We're finding different ways to solve various problems in the world and so on. However, if you come across a time like my colleague did where your work's represented, something about it is not represented, maybe the first thing to do isn't to bash that person or to take to, all the social media and put it out there, but to actually talk with that person first. Because I know with this colleague, they understood that that was not my intention. Was kind of like somebody else was like a middleman between us, and I should have thought about this a little bit. Definitely my mistakes are on my part. I fully own it, but we just had a discussion to understand how it could have happened. And so I think in this case, if you find that some of your scholarships out there being kind of negatively talked about in the world, sometimes scholarly critique, well, I should say lots of times scholarly critique is necessary, essential, it's an important part of the process. But if something maybe is unfair or, is borderline bashing, having a conversation first might be a way to handle it before it escalates. And so now, like I said, I use the opportunity. My world's kind of a small world that I work in. I use that opportunity all the time to talk about that area. So I can do what I can to kind of make the situation better and also spread the word that that particular piece of information existing in my scholarship is not, it wasn't represented fully, right? So that's the first one that I wanted to say something about. Here would be another one. Another one would be a while back, I got a review of something that I worked on that was a negative review, but also I found it borderline offensive for lots of reasons. This particular project that I was working on was one that it was with participants. In this case, I felt like I represented them fairly, everything like that. There was no question on that on the review. It was more about the focus of my work. And this reviewer, as sometimes reviewers do, was trying to make me go in a certain political direction with my scholarship, which I would not do for lots of reasons. One, I knew it would make the study that I had done not valid, so I had big problems with it on that front. But on the other front, the mission of the project was not the thing the reviewer was trying to make the thing, to make it simple. And so I think in this case, that editor, I parted ways on that project that did not go to that publication outlet because for lots of reasons, but this review was a large part of it. And I think the editor in that case felt kind of bad because I know editors, especially after being one, you can't control what your reviewers write. You can only use what has been given. Now you can edit what goes out to the writers themselves, the scholarly authors, but much of the peer review process, editors don't have a lot of control over. If it's farmed out, it is, if it's out there for volunteers to complete these reviews. So in this case, later, 2-3 years later, the editor threw another opportunity my way that was a really good match. They did not have to do that. They threw it my way. And I don't know this, but I think it might be because they realized this other situation was really unfair. So maybe they couldn't really help me in that particular situation, but they could help me with a new thing by throwing a new project my way. And so I'm pretty sure that happened. I cannot prove it. So thank you, editor. You might know who you are. That was a really great project to throw my way. And so I think, to me, that makes it, kind of the situation much, much better. So it's another way where we're kind of doing some work to kind of help each other out as scholars, as editors and reviewers. And then the last one I was thinking about is this, and especially from both of those situations kind of shape how I think about doing peer reviews now of other people's scholarship. And now I'm at the point where I know, especially like with some scholarship with peer reviews, I've had some really great peer reviews, definitely, but I've also had some ones that are not great and some that, like I said, are borderline offensive or whatever. But I do think about new scholars, many of which who come to defend, publish, and lead because they get, for example, a revise and resubmit, and they get reviews back that are scathing, really, they're just bad. They're not uplifting. They don't support things that are in the scholarship. And especially for newer scholars in the field, when they get those, it's distressing. Other, scholars that have been around for a long time, professors that have been around for a long time can take maybe the more long view that, this is one review is not, the end of your scholarly career. But one of the things I think we can do when we do peer reviews for each other is really look to find kernels of things that are useful in scholarship. I would bet that in most scholarly projects, there's something in there. something is useful, even if you disagree with the methodology or the theory or the argument or all three, that there's something in there that might be useful. Maybe it's the question that needs to be funneled in a different way. And so one of the things I try to do with peer reviews now is I try to give specific, useful feedback. So things that the author can definitely do. And then sometimes I'll offer something a little bit bigger that if they have the time, they really want to push it, they want to take their scholarship in another direction, maybe as part of the piece they're working on now or another one later on, I'll give them maybe something bigger to work on. But a lot of times with peer reviews, reader or the authors will get back, 50 things they have to do. Or do all 50 have to be in there to really make that piece go? Maybe not. Maybe there's five that really have to happen and they're falling into, say, five buckets. Like for this one, make sure you weave the theoretical lens all the way through the essay. Like it looks like it's just tacked on here. I'm not sure it's actually applied. Maybe that's one of the criticisms. But really having that specific feedback in a direction. I do like scholarly feedback that's packaged in a way that makes sense. So I know in my episode on using Asana to tackle a revise and resubmit, that episode is not so much about Asana. It is because that's where I actually tried using Asana, but it's more, and that's a project management software if you've never used it before, but it's more about categorizing the types of revisions that need to be made. How great would this be for peer reviewers if they went out into the world and when they gave back feedback, they categorized the types of revisions that have to be made in these buckets? So, one of the ones I said is what's a big change that has to happen all the way through the manuscript? What's a big change that has to only happen once? Those are two different things. And as a scholarly author facing down all these revisions, it's hard to know what to prioritize in terms of time, but also in terms of emphasis. So, sometimes there's an easy fix, but it has to go all the way through the manuscript. So it's time consuming, but it's not hard. So a way that we might be civil and collegial in our peer reviews is to think through, if I was this author getting this back, would I know what to do? Maybe the answer is no. And it might be worth it with that peer review to just take a minute, check out your letter, maybe repackage things, or at least prioritize things. Say, these are the priority fixes, 1, 2, and 3. If you could do 4 and 5, that would strengthen it. But it's not essential. Maybe give them some choice in that because so much of peer review is a powerless process. So I don't know if these helped, but I'm thinking that, when we're kind of talking about how to kind of navigate being civil, there's certainly like other areas in our lives, in politics, in the world, at our universities, wherever we're located, there's certainly all these places where uncivil discourse is happening. But in terms of scholarship, it is up to us, I think, to work with each other in that way, to have a scholarly community where we're really respecting each other's viewpoints and looking at things, even if it's a different perspective of your own, having a civil discussion about that. So I always think it's, really great when we have panels on an issue where it's looked at from a bunch of different sides in a civil way. I always enjoy going to those at my own scholarly conferences. And so when those events happen, I do try to support them by being an audience member and going to see that, to basically vote with my feet that I find that kind of discussion valuable. So hopefully this gives you some food for thought this week, and I encourage you to check out other episodes for the Big Rhetorical Podcast 2024, and happy writing this week.